Hi, welcome to the Lavender and Steel podcast. My name is Rachel Saunders, and it is my great pleasure to introduce the wonderful Rosie Garland, who is a writer, performer, singer, poet, and queer icon. And it's also a great pleasure to call her a friend. I've known Rosie for over 20 years. And we first met when she was performing and hosting her legendary evening in Manchester back in about 2002, 2003.
I know. And that happened.
I know.
It's 20x years, yeah.
And I think that's the interesting thing about queerness, and it's one of the things I'm really keen to capture on this podcast, is showing how the breadth and reach of queer lives touches far beyond just the headlines. It's actually, queer lives are a normative experience, and I think it's one of those really fascinating things how you've grasped hold of your queer identity and made it such an interesting and integral part of your performativity.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting, making it part of my performativity. I would have just said that it's what I do. I mean, sure, it's like we can get into theories of performance and performativity, but that would kind of take it down a completely different angle. It just kind of pours out of me because it's what I am. It would be like trying to separate my queerness from me would be like trying to separate my red corpuscles from my white corpuscles in my blood. It's very intrinsic and embodied. And, it's that, it was Bell Hooks that said queer, sure, as in paraphrasing the amazing Bell Hooks terribly, but it's the idea of queer as in how one relates to the world as much as one's sexuality. Yeah. So
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think that's the thing that people forget when they hear the LGBTQI plus acronym. It's not just sexuality, it's not just gender, it's not just expression, it's anything that isn't heteronormative or cisnormative. It's that breadth beyond it. I call it the gender hinterland. And to a point, I think everyone exists in it, but people like us, we use it and move through it and flow through it without it becoming jarring or problematic.
I mean, for me, it's very much, again, I'm not saying anything new here, but, queer, for me, queer is anything that like questions, challenges, disrupts, dismantles, non-normative, I guess.
So it's like, as we've gotten older, I know, I remember being an 18-year-old, I think I was 18 or 19 when I first saw one of your shows. It was like, you were this amazing presence on stage, and you've always had this amazing, captivating presence. And anyone who's fortunate enough to catch Rosie's shows will tell you this. And also, when you read her books, you see this amazing life that's just there. And
yeah, I think as I have got, I didn't really think about. I can remember the first time somebody it was in Manchester, somebody wanted to film me for like queer heritage, like older queers talking about Manchester history, Manchester queer history, blah, blah, blah. And I was kind of really surprised. This was in the early 2000s. And I went, what? And they said, yeah. It's like you're part of history. It's like you remember history. And it kind of really took me back because I'd never really thought of that.
Manchester in particular, and we've had other guests on the show who've talked about Manchester's history, is like Manchester seems to be this axis around which you've had not just Canal Street, but other spaces, other places, other times where queerness has become imbued in the city, like almost like Brighton has got that queer reputation. And you walk through Manchester and it's got this urban working class grittiness to it, or it used to have.
Manchester has an amazing queer history, and not just queer in terms of sexuality, but it's, It's where the Industrial Revolution started. It was the birth of the computer, thanks to the amazingly gay Alan Turing. It's got the suffragettes with all the kind of, disruptive politics of their time. It's where the Communist Manifesto was written in a working class area. So it's got this incredibly non-normative, disruptive queer history. Yeah, absolutely. Maybe that's why I was drawn there. Maybe it's something in the water.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, for those who haven't been to Manchester, there's a small gardens called the Sackville Gardens.
Yeah.
And it's usually at Pride or at the trans celebration called Sparkle when it was running. They used to put performances in the Sackville Gardens before they moved it to a bigger car park elsewhere to sell more tickets. And actually, the history of spaces in Manchester, you've got this celebratory feel, but then over the last 2 decades, you've also had this juxtaposition with the police and the local authorities, and it hasn't always been a smooth transition from what came before to queer liberation. There's always been that tension.
Yeah, I've noticed that there are venues in the so-called queer village that have closed down. Like there was a bar that was particularly welcoming of women. It wasn't woman exclusive or people who identified as women, but that's gone. And it's like you wonder whether the crunching of the so-called pink pound has contributed to a lot of that. And, I'm something that I'm noticing is, and that I love, and that just gives me joy and hope for the future, Rachel, is the fact that if I have the honour of passing on some kind of baton, then I am incredibly humbled by that. It is amazing when I do shows, do gigs now. Invariably, there are people in the audience who weren't born when we met in 2002, and they'll come up and they'll say, wow, it's like the way that you have just lived openly and authentically has given me kind of a permission, particularly when I do March Violet shows, people who cannot have been around when no chance were they around when we formed, because we formed in 1981. And it's like, but younger queer folks, working class folks, gender non-binary and trans folks, and just general lovely queer young folk come up and say, your music made a difference, your words made a difference when I was struggling with feeling isolated and alone. And, hearing that is so moving and so life-affirming that it is worth doing this. And it reminds me of when I was because I grew up in rural England, for heaven's sake, southwest of England, which was not a fun place to be if you are in any way smidgen, iota, fraction different. And I can remember scary goth mothers like Pauline Black and Polystyrene, and even Susie Quattro and Susie Sue. They gave me a sense of permission that I can do my weird stuff. I'm allowed to do this. If they can do it, so can I. I know it's the whole thing about representation matters, but it carries on mattering. If I'm honoured enough to be doing some of that now, then I mean, it is an honour. I'm not doing that kind of ghastly humble brag nonsense. Living authentically and true to oneself seems like one of the most courageous and life-affirming things that we can do. I mean, again, to quote Cyndi Lauper, the wonderful Cyndi Lauper, who said, it ain't over until you give in, and you don't have to give in.
One of the amazing things that Rosie's done is she's, as the introduction said, she's written some amazing books. Like if you get a chance, check Rosie's books out. They're exceptionally well written, but they're also hella queer and hella deep. There's a lot of texture and subtexture in them. And about 4 or 5 years ago, I was very fortunate. Rosie and one of her other collaborators invited me to write a book chapter for an academic book, talking about queer experiences and queer lives. And as a baby academic who was just starting their PhD and just looking for ways to explore experience, it was a really interesting opportunity because I ended up writing a chapter talking about trans experiences and being a trans woman. Looking back over 20 years of being trans, I use my framing as travel, and especially train travel. And I lived in Preston during my first degree, and I went into Manchester a lot by train, and there was always this rhythm of having to get the last train back at 2 a.m. So you're never quite able to just do the whole Manchester experience. And then on the odd occasion where I did stay late, it was always this undertexture of what was hidden beneath the surface. And it was such a good representation of queer lives, because what we present to the world in public often has to be circumscribed because people don't necessarily understand that the subtexture is the spice of it, the actual nuance that makes us people is that subtexture.
Yeah, I loved that chapter. It was great. It was just came at the subject from such an unusual and interesting, the idea of like seeing it in terms of train, transience, travel, being in between places. I found that an absolutely the texture of that was great, Rachel.
Thank you. No, it was a real pleasure to write, even though you did have to chase me quite a lot to get it finished.
But you were always there. You always did it. You got there.
Yeah, and I think like Rosie had a really interesting sojourn at the Rylands Library, and I'd be very interested to hear about how your experiences as an academic in that space or adjacent to normative expectations.
Okay, maybe I can best express that my relationship with academia by going way, way back in time to when I was doing my master's, because I was at Leeds. I was at the University of Leeds back in the 80s. Yes, that is how old I am. I cannot hide it any longer. And I did my BA and I did my MA at Leeds, and my master's was, I might as well give you the thesis title because it kind of sums up a great deal of me. It was the apocryphal elements in the illuminations in the benedictional of St. Athelwold. I know that usually stops conversations at parties. You can imagine I had lots of friends. Anyhow, there I was, having just done a thesis about a very obscure part of early Anglo-Saxon art and literature, and they liked it, and they offered me on the spot a funded place to do a doctorate studying obscure Anglo-Saxon saints' legends and the cult of relics and blah blah blah, which is something that is still very close to my heart. And at exactly the same time as I was offered this very enthusiastic offer of a fully funded doctorate to study all this weird shit, it was at the time when the March Violets, the post-punk band that I referred to earlier, was starting to do really well. And I knew I couldn't do both. And it was not an easy choice because I loved academic study, but I also loved singing, performing, being this out queer female in the post-punk movement. And there weren't terribly many of us. I was the only queer goth I knew, although I know that has changed dramatically and there were probably lots of people in the closet at the same time. And the other thing I knew was that I could take up academic study pretty much at any time in my life, but I couldn't be in then I thought, although it's been disproved, then I thought my only opportunity to really sleep in the back of vans and tour Europe and generally be in a cruddy, noisy, raucous band was then. So I made the choice not to take up my enthusiastically offered and fully funded PhD place and be in the band and give myself full time to the band. And it kind of was the right decision. But it does show that, again, in the words of the lovely Walt Whitman, I contain multitudes. I am academically minded. I have a passion for study, but that is balanced, not balanced at all. There's a massive tension. And I think tension is what makes things happen. That kind of buzz of tension and contradiction, internal contradiction, is what makes life happen and what makes art happen, what makes creativity happen. That's why I knew that being a performer and a singer and a lyricist and a writer wasn't just this kind of hobby I was going to give up and get a sensible job to replace. And that stayed true to me. But yeah, that doesn't mean I don't do academic things. Like I'm currently working with the University of Manchester on a creative writing project. I'm also working with MMU, Manchester Metropolitan, blah, 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 blah. You know, I could just bang on and go me, but I'm not going to. So it's like, yeah, I could take multitudes, but the other line in that Leaves of Grass poem by Walt Whitman is, do I contradict myself? Yes, I contradict myself.
Yeah, I feel this. I feel the same, Paul. It's like I've got, like, people talk about having two wolves inside of you. I think I've got a whole pack of wolves floating around. It's like,
why limit yourself? Yeah, why limit yourself to two wolves? Have an entire pack, darling.
Exactly, and I think this is where the interesting thing for me comes in. It's like, as an academic, I'm very drawn at the moment to the juxtaposition between rights, AI, and how AI is going to shape identity. But then on the creative side, it's like, I've got the short story about Juicer's blind lesbian girlfriend.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's a trope that's been doing rounds on various forums for a long time. But it's like, actually, how do you, if you look at Greek history, ancient Greek history, it's all been about gay men and like Patroclus and Achilles, but actually in the lesbian subtext there's always things like, if Medusa can't be seen by somebody sighted, well, surely her lover would be blind. And then you've got the whole Sappho subtext that you could go, actually, what if she still remained at the Temple of Athena? What if she took in a blind refugee? What if they fell in love, etc., etc., etc.? And it's like, for me, that's what queerness is. It's like being able to reimagine the past without distorting it beyond all shape, and actually going, the past was hella queer. How do you reclaim that queerness without it being
Well, of course it's queer, because we've always been here.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just that simple. It's like, I always get really surprised when people say, like, queerness is new, and it's like, really? No. And it is this whole idea of, I don't have a problem with the word queer. I know some people have a problem with the word queer, but it's this idea of, it challenges the idea that straight is normal. You know, all this kind of stuff about a so-called normal very much, for me, only really kicks in with colonialism, white colonialism, post-industrial revolution. People have to fit into certain categories. If you look at the indigenous cultures that were colonized by ghastly white people, they had no problem with queerness and otherness. It's the colonizers, it's the invaders who have the issue. Anyway, so we've been there forever, blah, blah, blah. So let's get that one out of the way. Yeah, so end of chat, right, bye, next.
Yeah, it might.
I noticed you used the dreaded phrase AI, and I'm sorry, I am going to say something as a creative. My humble opinion, such as it is, apart from the fact it's sort of like, destroying the entire eco-culture, small matter of destroying the world and like taking all the water away. Let's put that aside for 1 nanosecond. Human beings are made of story. We are constructed of story. It is what we are from the first half side that we huddled around as Denisovans or Neanderthals or whatever, but early hominids, from the first half that we huddled around, chasing away the darkness with story. It's what we are. It's like, it is a fundamental part of humanity to create those stories. And children, what AI does is it regurgitates, it creates nothing. And so in that way, it robs us of our fundamental humanity and our right as humans to create.
Yes,
I can't say it any clearer. And it's like, so just say no.
I call myself an AI skeptic. I'm not anti-AI in principle, but I think I agree with everything you've just said. In terms of research in terms of my personal interest is much more a case of going, these tools have been put into an ecosystem where people are not trained to critically engage with them. And unlike phones, where 10 years ago we were having conversations about phones causing brain rot, phones causing distraction problems, people were using AI as a heuristic to shortcut the knowledge making process.
Yeah.
And actually, if you want to learn, it's got to be hard. It can't be frictionless. You've got to actually sit down, read a book, read a text, read a source, critically engage with it, understand that it's not perfect, and that the imperfections are what are a core part of the human condition, that we're all this jumble of intersections, that there's no one way to exist as being a human being, and that a lot of the AI systems are being developed to homogenize and create this perfect median human.
Absolutely right, which erases anything that is, I mean, if you just look at like default AI images, look what, there are no brown people. Yeah. Do you know, every brown person I know who does use AI, the images they have produced of themselves whiten them. And so that's only one tiny tip of one tiny iceberg. And yeah, do you know, it's designed, it's like the kind of the sort of people who are behind AI, let's be completely honest, the people who are developing it are white, heteronormative, tech bros, all of whom are skating around the edges of the Epstein list. It's like, exactly. It's like, no, I don't want to buy anything from you. Thank you very much. Or use anything you produced. Ew.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the fundamental issue we've got to ask is, what does it mean to be human? Because if being human...
Thank you.
I don't intend this to be a highbrow, impenetrable conversation, because it's easy enough to go into Foucault and Bourdieu and Bruno Latour, who I happen to be reading at the moment. In fact, if anybody wants a really good read, We Are Not Modern is an exceptionally good read for dealing with AI, because it deals with this issue of what we consider modern is just a marker in time. Like 20 years ago, we considered ourselves modern, and actually 20 years ago is history. And actually what is being encoded into AI, the data it's collecting, the shape of the people that it's trying to force us into, is just somebody's idea of what it means to be human. And you raised correctly the idea of people of color and people of different cultures and backgrounds being squeezed into a very middle class, wealthy American framing of what it is to have the human condition.
And we return to like one of the very first phrases that I used in this whole conversation is the idea of non-normativity and queerness, which means, hurrah, that AI is anti-queer.
Yes, exactly. And it's
like any queers that are engaging with AI aren't queer anymore. Sorry, you've lost your badge.
Yeah, exactly. And it's funny because you look at, if you ever get a chance to read Hannah Arendt's work, she can be very complicated to read, especially things like Origins of Totalitarianism. But one of her key points was that marginalized groups who are othered gain political power by embracing their otherness and by not assimilating.
Yes.
But yet, if you don't assimilate, you make your life a lot more complicated.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think we're facing this point now where everyone who's become assimilated, for whatever reason, their political power is being undermined and threatened because they don't want to lose that comfort or that ease. And you're seeing it with trans people, you're seeing it with cis women who are losing access to abortion, you're seeing it with gay men who are losing access to HIV treatment in America, with PrEP being restricted. You're seeing this whole range of restrictions, and it's like, where's the radical queerness that led to the first Stonewall, that led to the movements in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, when the oppression was real, when the laws were against us, but yet that radical non-assimilation actually led to systemic change? And I don't know how you perceive it, or...
Well, what I perceive it is that, like, generations that are far, younger than me are just living it. They're living that queerness, they're living that, resistance to normativity, in their very being. It's like, I don't think it's a mistake that so much of the bile and hatred of older generations towards youth, which we've seen previously, it seems to be very much aimed at an entire generation who are questioning gender as a thing, you know, who are just saying, gender, I'm sorry, I'm not playing, whether that's identifying as trans or gender non-binary or just like, well, I'm just not playing in that playground at all. And that gives me amazing hope. And, you know, that kind of radical attitude towards living. Yeah, there are, you know, not all in older generations, because I'm from an older generation and I'm not ghastly transphobe, but I think a lot of the sort of like particular transphobia is, do you know, and this might sound a bit weird, but I actually just think it's badly disguised hatred of younger people. It was, I mean, I'm just to track back about something that Gore Vidal once said about the First World War, you know, World War One, which was, you know, the slaughter of a young generation, largely engineered by older people who stayed a great distance behind the front lines. Gore Vidal said the First World War was the revenge of the old upon the young.
That is a very apt description, and I've heard that described. Like,
whether it's like, you know, just reframing that slightly, I can't help wondering whether a lot of transphobia is the revenge of the old against the young. I don't know. It's just something I think about, you know, because it's certainly really young folk that I meet. Maybe I'm just meeting the weirdos. Hooray! But young people I meet or just see just seem to be, you know, they've just gone, nah, we're not playing by any of these rules. We're going to do our thing. The rebirth of fanzines when everyone said print culture was dead and everyone did everything online. It's like the rebirth of fanzines, the rebirth of vinyl, the rebirth of, you know, live events. It's all coming from grassroots, and I blinking love it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think Vidal's quote is actually really apt when you look at even going back to 2008. You could argue that the 2008 financial crash was an extractive grab by the older generation against those who were seeking to get a better life through mortgages and through trying to get financially ahead. Yeah. And every echo since then has been like the COVID pandemic and the jobs crash that has happened since then. Culturally and societally, I don't think we've actually recovered the good quality jobs that would enable Gen Z and Gen A to actually get ahead in life.
Oh dear, yes.
I love teaching and I love being a mentor to people, and it's like it's really lovely seeing the next generation who are passionate, who care, who want to move things forward. And you listen to the way they talk, and they've taken the fire that you saw in the 80s and the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and then now turning it back onto the systems that are destroying themselves, destroying their lives in a way that isn't just trying to tear the system down, but trying to think of a better way, thinking of systems that can improve the quality of our lives, not just going, here's a problem, let's identify the problem. They're going, here's a problem, how do we make the world a more structurally better place?
Yeah, agreed. I couldn't agree more. And it's interesting that you're a mentor as well, because that's something I'm doing an increasing amount of, mentoring writers particularly, and I'm delighted and astonished, and it gives me life energy to be around their life energy. That makes me sound like a vampire, and I'm really, really not. Not in a bad way, anyway. Symbiotic vampires, hurrah. But I find that mentoring is a marvellous way of keeping alive and keeping connected with others' wonderful creativity.
Yeah, I agree. And I think this is, I would say I'm not necessarily terminally online, but I'm trying to be more tuned in to what younger creators and younger content creators have been saying, because there's an amazing content creation that's coming out. You've got people like Abigail Thorne who's in Philosophy Tube, and you've got ContraPoints, and you've got other queer content creators who, yes, they can have problematic outputs, and a lot of people might disagree with what they're saying, but they're saying it and they're putting it out there into the world, and they're getting that conversation going. They're fostering a conversation that wouldn't have existed. And it's ironic that 20 years ago, people were complaining about there's lack of queer visibility on TV, yet one of the few benefits of social media and YouTube and Reddit and other platforms has been that queer spaces have exploded. But if you're a queer content creator, if you want to make a living and you want to actually earn money from being queer, you can find a space and you can find a way to exist as somebody who produces and creates and put yourself out into the world that 20 years ago didn't exist. And it was a real struggle to find any queer representation. It wasn't just cliches.
Yeah. And all of that, it's, just because it's a world that I don't know particularly, it's like, why should I know it? Why should I be part of that world? Because this is, but what I want to do is support in any way I can folk building their own world. If I can become somebody else's scary goth mother and provide support and encouragement and cheerleading from the side, and also just by existing, at my age, and just going, seriously, it's okay over here, it's worth it. Hang on, build your world, because one day you will be here and people will say, my goodness, you made a difference to me. We all I am very aware of the batons that were handed on to me, and reaching back, hand over hand over hand over hand, back into, those first half sides. It's not about standing here and going, oh, well, I know better because I am old. It's about saying, it's like, hey, what can I do? How can I support you? How can my sheer existence make you feel like you want to just carry on for another day?
Oh, yeah, I agree completely. And I have been beneficiary of your very goth motherness. I feel like there's been points where we've had long conversations in the past where it's like, you've got a lot of wisdom in the best possible way. You've got a lot of wisdom, hard-fought wisdom that actually I benefited from. And as you said, passing that baton on, I'm getting to the stage now, I'm in my mid-40s, and I'm feeling like, not that I'm quite an elder stateswoman, but I'm showing what it is to be a trans person 25 years into a transition, showing what it is to be around an executive and being an academic and a content creator. And I don't necessarily want my transness or my queerness to be front and center. They're just a part of who I am. But if I can enlighten and show and help and provide support for other people who are just starting out on those journeys, I'm happy to put my personal identity on the line and show that while I do retain a lot of privacy, there are certain things I will never discuss. My identity isn't one of those things. It's like, I'm very happy to say, I'm here, I'm queer, and I'm not going to go away.
Yeah, and it's like we, as queers, we've always done that. Because obviously, as I've said in the past, I'm also a very private person, but there are some parts of me that are not up for negotiation. Yeah,
and I think this is the balance. I wrote a blog piece recently about this, talking about actually no queer person owes anybody else a part of their identities. You only give what you're prepared to give, and nobody has a right to any other part of you. And it's very easy to say in practice, especially if you're somebody whose identity is normative. Like, you could be a white cis male Manchester United supporting beer retailer, and the beer retailer will be the most interesting thing about you. People will want to talk to you about the beer, about how you sell beer to other people.
Yeah.
If you're a queer trans woman from the south of England who has got a doctorate, which part of that aspect of your identity will people find interesting? Now, for me, it would be the doctorate or coming from the south of England, but other people might alight on the queer or the trans. And I don't know how you find that when you talk about your identity. What part of you do you want to allow other people to dissect? And I think that's the balance that I think a lot of people have to judge.
I think people will dissect me if they feel like it, and there's not a great deal I can do about it other than just go, oh, do your worst. I'm over here.
That's a great attitude to have. Maybe we should start a band called the Vivisectors and just allow people to vivisect us and just go, actually, what do they find?
I've had a lot of experience of people going, I don't like you because, or I criticize you because. And it's like, do your worst. I've survived cancer. You can't scare me. Cancer is a great deal more scary than that person's attitude, Yeah,
I think illness is a great leveler, isn't it? It gives you perspective.
Yeah. And I've survived a stalker who I had to get 2 restraining orders out on. It's like, some of it just means I just kind of go, whatever. What have you got? What have you got that can possibly scare me? I mean, sure, there are very scary things out there, but just on a daily basis, it's, whoever that person is who's having a go at me, they are not scarier than chemotherapy.
Yeah, I agree. I've fortunately never been through cancer, but I have had several serious health scares. And it's like, it puts things into perspective where you just go, what do I actually want out of life? And what's important, more pertinently, what's important in life. And like for me, I love traveling. I love good food. I love great company. I love to learn, as you were talking about doing your master's and the turning points in doing that. I mean, I dropped out of university in 2003, and yet in 2016, I went back at 34 and I did undergrad, master's, PhD back to back. And it was such an interesting experience being around 18-year-olds, because as somebody who was double their age, I still felt young, but I was old enough to be their parents. And that was such an illuminating experience, going, you can feel young and you can exist as a young person, but actually the world keeps turning, the world keeps moving. Young people, queer people, whatever people keep coming through the world, and actually I've got as much to learn from them as I might be able to impart on them.
Absolutely. But it does remind me of that thing that I always say to folk who feel that they've got a creative idea, or they've got this notion for a podcast or a play or a screenplay or a poetry film or a poem or a novel or a short story, whatever it is, do it now. Seriously, just do it now. Start now. Because there is no tomorrow. There is no better time. There is never a good time to sit down and write a story. There's never a perfect time. Just do it. Because you never know if a piano's going to drop on your head tomorrow morning when you walk out of the house.
Absolutely, I agree. Well, I thank you for your time, Rosie. It's been an absolute pleasure, as always. You are somebody who I could spend hours and hours talking to, and I would happily have coffee after coffee with you. You sparkle and you're effervescent in a way that I think if anybody gets a chance, as I said before, definitely pick up some of Rosie's books. If there's a show nearby, definitely check out Rosie, because her band, her poetry, her wit, her sense of humor is just like lights up the room whenever she's wherever she's there, and it's always a great pleasure talking with you.
Did I actually say the name of the band? If people want to, it's the March Violets. And if I'll do a bit of a plug now, why not? Because I'm useless at that. MarchVioletsBand.com. You can find us there. And also, if anybody does such things as websites, I'm at RosieGarland.com.
Absolute pleasure, Rosie. And thank you for spending your time, showing your time with us today. And hopefully people will connect with you online.
Thank you.